A long time ago, and in a land far away, by which I mean Winnipeg in about 1999, I worked as a volunteer coordinator for a number of small food banks and drop-in day centers who were working with people who are unhoused or very much on the margins, struggling with income or food security. And I would visit churches to talk about these ministries that I was a part of. There's a number of different churches working together. Or I would do volunteer trainings. And one of the exercises that I would do with people, and maybe you've done something like this before, is the chair exercise. And in this illustration, you have 10 chairs. So almost like we put one in the middle here, almost like these 10 chairs in front of us. And each chair represents 10% of the nation's wealth. And each person, so you have 10 people then standing in front of the 10 chairs, each person represents 10% of the population. I don't remember exactly what the stats were in the late 90s, but I looked up sort of what wealth distribution is now. And if we were doing this exercise now, the first person, one person would have the first 6 chairs. So that's 10%, first 6 chairs. Then the next 4 people would have to share 3 chairs. And then the last 5 people would share the last chair. So 5 people sitting on that one chair. You can imagine just how that feels in your body when you have to do an exercise like that. I don't think the distribution was all that different in 1999. It feels similar to what I taught then, but what has absolutely changed is actually within those 6 chairs, one person or 1% of people would own the majority of that wealth. And of those on the bottom, one person actually would probably not have a chair at all. Negative, or multiple people would not have any chairs at all, be negative wealth. I'm a visual person, so exercises like this really help me. And I was, there's lots of kinds of infographics on this kinds of wealth distribution that you can find too. And one that I just encountered this week on social media was a young woman talking about this kind of distribution, and especially around like how many billionaires we now have, which didn't exist 25 years ago when I was doing this exercise. But this young woman on Instagram was talking about the difference between even our like super rich pop stars. And the examples she used were like Taylor Swift and Billie Eilish and Beyonce, and who are all worth in like $50 to $800 million range, which is already like unimaginable. But the wealth that they have is a tiny percentage of what folks like Bill Gates and Bezos and Musk have, whose wealth is in the billions. So she had like this little graph, kind of what I showed you here, but then like the billionaires were like a line, and then another line, and then another line, and then another line, and then another line of all of how much more what actually they own is worth compared to we plebiscites, and even compared to, the Beyoncés of the world, who are wildly wealthy. It's just like a tiny drop in the ocean. I also learned from that video that apparently recently Billie Eilish, who was worth, I think, about $50 million, gave away $11 million, or maybe she's worth, doesn't matter, gave away $11 million of her wealth to environmental causes. Versus Bill Gates recently coming out and saying about climate change, and I quote, "People will be able to live and thrive in most places on Earth for the foreseeable future." That is a direct quote from Bill Gates' mouth about climate change. Apparently, he didn't hear about the hurricane that just devastated Jamaica. Just devastated people, or all of the places where MDS goes to minister to people whose homes have been destroyed as a result of human-made climate change. The point is, I'm a little bit like going off on a rant, but the point is, billionaires are the problem. And I know that many of us sort of struggle to think about how do we use our wealth, how do we use the privilege that we have, because we are relatively privileged in this world, most of us. And we struggle to think, how do we use that? We agonize even about how do we use what we have, about overconsumption, about ownership and investments. I've heard many conversations about this as I've sat in Sunday school with many of you. But I want to say, and I said it this morning, we are not the problem. Billionaires are the problem. I didn't say it quite that way. But I believe Amos agrees with me. Or actually, more accurately, I believe Amos was quoting God, who said, who has thoughts about morality and injustice, and about those who are oppressing the poor and crushing the weak and exploiting the laborer. And Amos is God's mouthpiece, saying, "Doom to you who turn justice into poison and throw righteousness on the ground. You hate the one who reproves in the gate, and you abhor the one who speaks the truth. You trample on the poor and take levies of grain. You who afflict the righteous, who take a bribe and push aside the needy in the gate." Amos is talking about a systemic problem, a system in which people are getting wealthy on the backs of the weak and the poor, a system where that gap between those who have billions, which of course they didn't in Amos's time either, but that gap between those folks on that end and the folks on that end is growing, increasing, and that those folks are really profiting on those who are at the farthest at the bottom. When Amos talks about the city gate, he talks about doing justice at the city gate, or one who's speaking the truth in the city gate. What he's talking about is the public forum. So like the gate of the city is the place where people came to hear arguments of like sort of justice. That's the court system. It's the place where you adjudicate disputes and where politics are hashed out. And those are the places where Amos sees justice being crushed and truth tellers being silenced. And when they speak about the problem of taxing the poor and letting them go hungry, he's seeing all of that playing out in those systems. And folks, I know you can see the parallels that are happening even now among us. Even now, as more and more of our tax dollars are being directed toward nuclear weapons and immigration agents and billionaires getting tax breaks. The problem is not that I have too many shoes in my closet or too many tech gadgets in my pockets. It's that those shoes and those gadgets are being produced in factories that collapse on their workers. That workers are being paid pennies a day for their labor, or distributed by warehouse workers who can't even take a break to go to the bathroom. God is unequivocal. God rejects systems that encourage those kinds of disparities. And God especially hates the hypocrisy of anyone who, after building and profiting from such systems, comes into worship to sing and pray and praise, or as we were talking about in Sunday school this morning, putting a Bible verse on their Instagram profile. God despises claims of love that come from someone who is not following the most central part of the law, which is love your neighbor. Do justice to the orphan and the widow. Feed the hungry. Love mercy. Walk humbly. It is interesting then that Amos says, "And the wise will stay quiet in times such as these." Amos is obviously not staying quiet. He is proclaiming this to his neighbors. He is using his voice to call out the unjust. But what I'm wondering, so the wise will stay quiet. What does it mean to be wise, and what does it mean to be quiet? What I wonder is, the point is you can't change a billionaire's mind by shouting at them. You can't change a billionaire's mind by preaching at them. The powerful will not be influenced by the cries of the less powerful, by complaints from the warehouse floor or the factory floor. In fact, they will react probably with even more strength to crush that. We've seen the way Amazon has tried to crush unions and Starbucks the same way. They'll just respond with more power. I don't believe that means we're off the hook. I don't think actually closing our mouths and not doing or saying anything is what Amos is talking about, because he goes on to say, seek good and not evil, so that you may live, and so that the Lord, the God of heavenly forces, will be with you, just as you have said. Hate evil and love good, and establish justice at the city gate. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. He's saying we have to stay in this game for good, in both of the senses, do good, but also for good, for the long haul. Stay committed to this engagement in justice and truth. This is a long game. Nurture justice, build relationships, connect to others who are also seeking good and not evil. Wherever you are able, whenever you are able. King said, as I think we've all heard, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. King is also the one who maybe most famously quoted Amos in talking about justice rolling down like water and an ever-flowing stream. And most famously, he used that quote in his I Have a Dream speech, right at the beginning, as he's getting going and talking about the movement. But he used it before that. He quoted Amos before that, and of course the prophets are central to King's sense of calling and identity. And just at the very beginning of the Montgomery bus boycott, in maybe his first public speech, almost a decade before the March on Washington, he kicked off the Montgomery boycott saying this in part. I mean, it's a longer speech, obviously. But he says, "We are not wrong in what we are doing. If we are wrong, justice is a lie. Love has no meaning. And we are determined here in Montgomery to work and fight until justice runs down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. There is never a time in our American democracy that we must ever think we are wrong when we protest. We reserve that right. When labor all over this nation came to see that it would be trampled over by capitalistic power, there was nothing wrong with labor getting together and organizing and protesting for its rights." King recognized that the power of capitalism does not respect the rights of workers. It only respects profit. And so he united people to not raise their voices, although they did that, but to make a point about profit and how they would spend their money and how they would use it. Uniting with others in acts of goodness and justice and righteousness in a sustained and in an ongoing way starts to chip away at what seems like an impenetrable dam of injustice. And yet, especially when our small acts combine to have economic consequences, which were so powerful in the civil rights movement, both with the bus boycott and then with the lunch counter sit-ins, there may be a turning point until justice will break forth like water and like an ever-flowing stream. Seek good and not evil, and you will live, and God will be with you. When we turn toward good, when we turn toward God by seeking good, we give our worship in hours like this one meaning. Amos is very blunt. God does not desire our worship and praise if we are not also considering the ways that we are parts of systems of evil at the same time. Which is what can be disheartening, is there are so many myriad ways that we could be turning away from evil, turning toward good. Which boycotts will we support? Which marches will we participate in? But I am constantly encouraged by the words of Thomas Merton, who prayed, "I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope that I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. Therefore, I trust you always. I will not fear, for you are ever with me. I am not sure yet whether I'll be able to be there, but Christians for a Free Palestine is once again planning a caroling event this year in December. And in some ways, that event will sort of marry all of these aspects of what Amos is talking about. It's anti-militaristic action, it's economic boycott, it's joyful singing and praise united into one public event. Focusing on the boycott of Chevron. Chevron is the fuel company that is resourcing most of Israel's military, and including prisons and military facilities, and has really literally fueled Israeli occupation. And so that's where they're focusing their boycott efforts. So this is a big unified actions are great. That's one piece of it. And they work, but it is not the only way to seek good and not evil. And again, you all know this. It's the accumulated actions that happen in communities. I went to the food bank, my local food bank, for the first time this week. I don't know what took me so long, but I volunteered there helping to pack bags. Well, I do know what took me so long. It's just like that little bit of extra effort, but I got an invitation from someone to come, and I did. So it's working out and donating to food banks. It's making welcome baskets for neighbors moving into La Quinta. It's getting to know who your neighbors are. It's training to know how to respond to ICE or the National Guard when they show up in your community. That's another thing that I did recently. And it's powerful to hear about just how we can make an impact by our observations and our presence in crises like that. It's supporting actions against gun violence, buying local and family-owned businesses. It's reducing and reusing and repairing. All of these things make an impact in our communities. They are seeking good and not evil. With all of these small chips in the dam, this dam that can seem like a wall, may we begin to see cracks so that justice will roll down like Niagara Falls and like the mighty Columbia River to nourish and nurture the land around it, the people who get sustenance from it. May our pursuit of goodness and justice nurture the fruit of peace. Amen.